Hi everyone. So today we are going to talk about Apex and we are going to start with the basics of Apex. Uh, Now Apex is one of the programming languages which is used in one of the two programming languages in fact which are used in Salesforce. So one is Apex. Apex is used for writing all sort of backend logics. If you want to do automations, you want to write logics which will get executed along with the DML, etc. Those are written using Apex. The other programming language that we have is LWC, the Lightning Web Components. Lightning Web Components or LWC is used for designing the front end. In addition to Apex and LWC, of course, there are a few additional programming languages like you can also use a bit of HTML, JavaScript, etc. But primarily two programming languages which we use uh, are Apex and LWC. So today we are going to start talking about Apex and I am going to discuss the very basics, the fundamentals of Apex today for those who are not from programming background. For them also it's pretty easy to understand, and of course if you are from programming background you will understand it quite easily. So let's get started. So basics of Apex, let's talk about it. So before we get into talking about other things, this is a programming language which is very similar to something like a Java or a C++, that kind of a programming language. So you can basically write your logics, loops, conditional statements, etc. So all those can be done using Apex. Okay, so let's get started. So this, first of all, let's understand that Apex is a strongly typed object oriented programming language. Now the keyword strongly typed here, if you see the keyword strongly typed, so what does strongly typed mean? Strongly typed basically refers to a programming language. So usually there are programming languages where you can define variables, right? Variable is something which is very common in programming language. So when we are working with variables, some programming languages need you to define the variable data type, and then you can use that variable for storing data only of that data type. For example, string A. So now A is the variable, string is the data type. Now when you are defining this string A as a variable, the variable A can only be used for storing a string value. You cannot use A to store an integer. Okay, so some programming languages have got this requirement. On the contrary, there are a few other programming languages where you just go and define a variable. Okay, so you can define something like var A. So var A would basically mean that there is a variable and you can use the variable to store any type of data. So you are not explicitly calling out the data type that needs to be stored in this. Okay. So Apex is a strongly typed programming language, which means every time you are defining a variable, you need to define a data type for that variable, and you can only store data of that particular data type. So if you are defining a string variable, you can only store string. If you are defining a data type, let's say integer variable, int I, then you can only store integer in that ways. Okay, so we'll talk a little more on what data types are allowed and all. So I will get into that. So it's a strongly typed object oriented programming language. Let me clean it. Give me a moment. I'm also slightly. Yeah, here we have the eraser. How do I delete this? Oh, in fact, I have ended up deleting a lot of other stuff. Other than this, there were annotations. Is it not this? This is weird. Okay, let it be. We'll continue. Okay, let it be. I'll figure it out later on. Okay, so let's go ahead. We were talking about yeah. How am I so bad with this? Okay, yeah. The next important thing is it helps you execute flow and transaction control statements. So if you basically want to define a flow or an automation sort of a thing, you can not the flow, the Salesforce flow, just a flow of events or a flow of logics, etc. That can be executed using Apex as well. So you can define your logic, if this happens to this, if this happens to this, etc. So that can be done. And also transaction control statements. So if you want to basically write statements, transaction control statements, when a record is being created, updated, you want to do something. If a record is being deleted, you want to do something. All those things can also be done using Apex. It enables developers to add business logic to most system events. So any sort of system event, you can basically add business logics to those. And let us understand. So which kind of system events are we talking about? It can be button clicks. So when you are clicking on a button, it can be record updates. Record updates means when a record is getting created, updated, or deleted, you can basically write logics to be executed, and Apex can be used for writing those logics. Then you can also use Apex with your front end and UI components. So for designing the front end, of course, you will be using LWC. I spoke about Lightning Web Components. So for that, you will of course be using LWC. But in case your front end also needs to basically work with the database, with the server, and it requires some execution of logic, again Apex comes into picture. Okay, so that's the thing. And this front end or UI components, there are two options. Mostly we use LWC, but there is another thing, Aura components. So Aura framework is the framework which was being used by Salesforce for front end designing before LWC came into picture. So we have Aura components, and then we have Lightning Web Components. Mostly you will be using Lightning Web Components, but yeah, there can be some Aura components as well. So in case you are designing front end components, you are designing your front end user interfaces using your Aura or Lightning Web Component, then you can use Apex to speak to server, to execute logics which are associated to the server, etc. Okay, so that's the thing. Okay, so that's the thing. Now let's understand. So one important thing that we discussed was about the one important thing that we discussed was basically about okay, sorry, let's get started again. Yeah, okay. So one important thing that we discussed was that in Apex, whenever you are defining a variable, you have to define a data type along with that. So it becomes very important for you to first of all understand what all data types are allowed. Okay, so we'll quickly talk about which all data types are allowed, and then I will talk about each data type a little more in details. Okay, so let's first of all list down what all data types are allowed, then we'll get into the details of each one of those. So the data types which we can use in Apex are first one is primitives. Primitives, as you can read here, it's basically the generic data types like string, integer, boolean. These are primitive data types. I'll talk a little more about that, which all primitives are allowed. I will talk a little more on that, but primitives are basically the generic data types, and you may have used it in case you are familiar with a programming language, or these are very similar or ones which are also used in other programming languages. So this data type is quite generic and not something which is very specific to Salesforce. Okay. The next one is SObjects. SObject refers to Salesforce objects. SObject, basically S stands for Salesforce and Salesforce objects. So this is the data type which can be used for storing records of any Salesforce object. So for example, if you want to store a complete account record in a variable, then you will need to define an SObject data type. Okay, so that way, because we are going to work with a lot of standard objects and custom objects, and during your logics, when you're writing your Apex code, you will need to work with records. So Salesforce has provided this additional data type SObject, which can be used. So this makes your life very easy. So basically, you don't have to think of what data type should I use for storing a complete record. For every Salesforce object, be it a standard object or a custom object, you can use the SObject data type. How to use it, I will come into that a little later, but yeah. So that is the, for now, let's understand that there is a data type which is available, which allows you to store full, complete records of Salesforce. Okay, that is the SObject. The third data type is collections. Okay, so while we discussed about the primitives and SObjects, now we are also going to talk about collection. So what is collection? Collection is basically very similar concept for those who are familiar with programming concepts, etc. For them, it's more like an array. Those who are not familiar with that, please do not worry. So it's basically when you are creating a variable to store multiple values in that particular variable, that's it. So if you are trying to store one string, you can just define string A. But if you are trying to store 10 strings, then you need a collection. So that is the thing. Okay. Now in Salesforce, again, collections, there are different types of collections. So there is something called list, which is an ordered collection. There is set, which is an unordered collection. And then there is a map, which is a key value pair. Okay. Now I'll talk about each of these in details. So we'll not get into, what is list, what is set, how are they different, etc. I'm not going to get into that right now. But these are the different types of collections available. So in general, most of the times you will be using, one of these data types for defining your variables, depending on, what do you need to store. So it's pretty simple, right? Now, if I say, hey, if I just need to store an integer or a string, etc., then primitive should help me. If I want to store complete record, then SObject should be there, should be used. And if I want multiple values to be stored in a variable, then of course we have got collections. And collections can be, as I said, it can be list, set, map. I'll get more detail, get into more details of collections and also primitives and SObjects now. Okay. So first of all, let's start with the primitive data type. So what is this primitive data type? We discussed about it. So these are basically the data types which are used in general in other programming languages also, and you may be familiar with those, right? So let's see which all primitive, or the mainly which all primitive data types are available. Let's see that. So one is Boolean. Boolean is the usual data type which can only store a true or false. So example can be, you can define it like this. I am slightly scared of writing on this right now, but yeah, I'll figure it out. But yeah, so you can understand, right? So this, okay. So one is Boolean. This is how you use it. Okay. Now, same way, the next one is a decimal. So Boolean can only store two values, true or false. So it can work well with checkbox kind of a thing. Second is decimal. Decimal is a number that includes a decimal point. So a number with a decimal point. How do you define it? You can simply define decimal x is equal to 3.14 or whatever. I mean, this is just an example. So if you want to store a number with a decimal, then you will have to use this data type decimal. Then there is a double, another primitive which is permitted is double. This is a 64-bit number that includes a decimal point. Okay. Then we have ID. ID is a primitive data type which is usually not, you would not come across this particular data type in other programming languages. You will come across Boolean, decimal, double, but ID is something which is very specific to Salesforce. And this data type lets you store a Salesforce ID. So every record has an ID in Salesforce, right? So it lets you store the ID of a Salesforce record in this particular data type. So you can define it like this: ID, record ID, or this is just a variable name. So you can put whatever ABC here, and you can store. You can use this variable to store record IDs. Okay. Then there is integer, a 32-bit number that does not include a decimal point. So if you have a decimal point, then you'll have to use decimal or double. And if you want to just store a number which does not have a decimal point, then you can use integer. Integer basically will let you store whole numbers. Okay, something like integer I is equal to 45. So if you just want to work with numbers which do not have decimal points or decimal values, for those you can use integer. And then there is long. Long is again pretty similar to integer only, but it can, instead of a 32-bit number, it can store a 64-bit number but without decimal point. So that's called a long. So long y is equal to this. So big numbers you can store. Okay. Next is string. String is the most common data type which we kind of keep on using. So you can possibly use string for storing any string value. So string value is basically the characters, etc. And you will have to use the string value that you are storing within the code for Salesforce to understand that, okay, fine, this is the value which needs to be stored. Next one is a date. Date is a value that indicates a particular day. Okay, so you can basically store the date, or use this data type to store date. So you can use this function date.new instance, and this is the year, month, and day of the date. Okay, so this way you can basically store date in this data type. Then there is date time. Date time is a data type which will let you store the date plus the time. Okay, same function you can use, and you can basically define so it's the year, month, day. So it will 1999 February 11th day of February, and then it is basically the hours, minutes, seconds, right? So this is how the format is. Okay, so 8 o'clock, 6 minutes and 16 seconds, something like this. Okay, and then there is a variable or primitive data type called time. This will help you store a specific time value, and this is how it can be used. Okay, so it's basically hour, minute, second, milliseconds, something like that. Okay, so that's about the primitive data type. So very simple. So if you want to use any of these primitive variables, data types to be stored, you can use the data type, one of these data types, to define your variable. Simple. Okay. Now let's move on to the other one, the SObject data type. SObject data type refers to an object in force.com platform. So SObject, Salesforce object, I spoke about it earlier. I said this refers to an object in the force.com platform. So anything which is on the force.com platform, any standard object or a custom object, those can be defined. You can define variables to store records from those objects using SObject data type. It represents a row of data. So SObject basically represents a row of data. Okay, and we'll see how do we define it. So let's see an example. So if you want to basically define one account record, you can simply go and write. So SObject, you don't use SObject as a data type as such. You use the name of the object. So for example, account is a standard object. So you can just use the name of the object, account. This is the variable name. Yeah, account. This is the variable name, and then you can basically go and define your which record you want to store there. All right. So in this case, I am just saying new account, and I've supplied the value of the name. This way, if there are 10 other fields in account, I can basically go and define the value for each field, like name is equal to this, and after this, if I want to define industry is equal to something, let's say education, whatever, type is equal to something. So this way you can completely define a record, or you can basically write queries to retrieve the value of an existing record. So now how to query, that is something again which we'll discuss a little later. We are not getting into that right now, but this is the concept. Okay. Same way now, the way I have defined a record for account, if I just want to go and define a record for contact, I can simply go and write it like this. Sorry. Contact C is equal to, yeah, or opportunity. If I want to define, I will just say opportunity OPS. So now what is happening? This C or this OPS, these are the variables. So C is basically a variable of type contact, which can be used for storing a contact record. OPS is basically a variable which can be used for storing an opportunity record. So that is how it works. All right. Okay. So now let's go to, yeah, so there is another example, contact C. And then you can also basically assign the values to the fields on that particular SObject record using these functions like C dot first name, C dot last name. So these are basically, yeah, so these are basically your field names. This has to be the field name, the API name of the field. Okay, and you can assign the value. Should be sync. Okay, anyways. So yeah, and if it's a custom object, usually custom object, the naming convention of the custom objects usually have the naming convention of the custom objects usually have a double underscore C at the end, right? So your custom object, so you just need to see the API name of the custom object. It will by default have a double underscore C. Any custom object will have a double underscore C at the end of the API name. Any custom field will also have a double underscore C at the end of the API name. Okay, and if you are working with relationships, any custom relationship, any custom field that you have created which is a relationship, and if you want to work with that relationship, custom relationships will have a double underscore R. I will write it a little more clearly. Sorry, what's happening? Double underscore C for custom objects, double underscore C for custom fields, and double underscore R for custom relationships. Okay, so when we later on, work with some relationship, I'll show you this example, but yeah, keep this in mind for now. Okay. Yeah, fine. So this is about SObject data type. So pretty simple. How do we define it? Now we are going to talk about the list data type. List data type. So this is basically, now we are getting into collections, right? So we spoke about it, that there are 3 types of collections that we are going to work with. First is the list. List is an ordered collection of primitives or SObjects. So list can be a collection of primitives, SObject records as well. Okay, and good thing about list is that this is an ordered collection. Okay, what do you mean? What do I mean by ordered collection? I basically mean that every value, when I say ordered collection, which means the values are the values which are getting into the list. So if this is the list, okay, so if there is a list and then there are values getting into the list, they maintain the order inside the list. Okay, so every value getting here maintain the same order. So the value which gets into the list first, so there is, along with the value, let's say there are values, let's say our values are Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, something like that. Okay, now each value which is getting into the list, the collection of my strings, will have an index number as well. Okay, so the first value that gets into the list will have an index 0. The second value will have an index 1, third value will have index 2, and so on. Okay, so it will be 3, 4, and they maintain this order. So Sunday will always have this index 0. Okay, so that is the thing. Now, what is the advantage, or why, how does it help? Now, the values are, whenever they are getting stored, they are always getting stored along with an index number, and the values are identified by those index numbers, which means if there is another Sunday, if I have one more Sunday entering here, index number for this will be 5, and your program will consider this Sunday and this Sunday as two different values because the index numbers are different. So it will not consider both of them as duplicate values. Okay, so the advantage of ordered collection is that you can have repeat of the same value, and there will be use cases where you would want repeat of the value in the same collection, because there can be situations where the same value is required multiple times, but every time it appears it has got a different significance, and for that business requirement it is needed for you to store it multiple times. So that is where a list works pretty well. Okay, so biggest advantage of using a list is that it's an ordered collection, and as I mentioned, that the values here are distinguished by their indices, and yeah, sorry. Give me a moment, let me fix it. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So values are basically distinguished by their indices. The index position of the first element in the list is always 0. Okay. Now let's see, how do you define a list? Defining a list is pretty simple. We basically define the list like this: list of integer, my list is equal to new list of integer. Okay. So this is how you define. So if you just have to define an integer, how would you define? You will just define the integer. But now with this, you are basically defining it as list of integer. Okay. If you want to add a value to the list, you can simply say my list. So the variable name dot add is a function which can be used for adding values. Or what will it do? It will basically add a value to the end of the list. So if there are already 20 values in the list, whatever you are adding now will get added to the 21st position. Okay. In case you want to retrieve a value from an existing list, so if there are, say, 100 values are there and you want to basically retrieve a value using the index number, you can do that. So integer I is equal to mylist.get 0. So this will retrieve the value in the index position 0. Okay. If you want to set the value of a particular index number, let's say you want to change the value of index number 5, then you can do it like this. So you can use the function mylist.set, and you can define the index number and the value that you want to set. Okay. So what will this do? It adds the integer 1 to the list at the index 0. So firstly, there are two parameters that you will supply here. First will be the index number, second one will be the value that you want to set there. Okay. So this is about the list. If you want to clear the list, if you just want to remove all the elements from the list, you can simply use mylist.clear. And for this list, there's a list class in Apex. You can basically refer to the Apex reference library. I will talk about that later on, but there are a lot more functions which can be used with list to work with the list. Okay. Okay. Now the next data type, which is set. Set is also a collection of values, but difference between list and set is list is an ordered collection, set is an unordered collection of primitives or SObjects. So what do you mean? What do I mean again when I say collection, unordered collection? So it's the opposite of ordered collection. So in ordered collection, every value was having an index number, and which meant that I could enter the same value multiple times, and since it was being distinguished based on the index number, there was no issue with repeat values. Okay. Now here it is an unordered collection, which means there are no index numbers. The values are being distinguished by the value itself. Okay. So now if we try to do the same thing here. Yeah. So if I create a set. So in set, every value which is getting into the set is identified or distinguished by the value itself. There is no index number. So if I say Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, excuse my handwriting, not that good, but yeah. So, okay, so all the values are getting into the set and they are distinguished. So there is no index number like we had in the list. So the values are distinguished by themselves, the value itself, okay. Now if there is another entry of Sunday here, the set will understand that this value already exists and this value will not, there will not be a repeat. It already exists and it will only retain one single unique value of that particular, one single unique value in the set, okay. So there will not be repeat. So there will not be 2 Sundays stored there. There will be, again, you will say, why do we need this? Of course, there are business scenarios, and once we start getting into writing code for a specific scenario, I will discuss use cases of list, and then I'll also discuss use cases of set. So, but for now, let's understand that, yeah, the main advantage of having this unordered collection is the values are distinguished by themselves, which means there will not be repeat of the same value, okay. So that's how it works, okay. Now the way we had a few functions which we could use for working with lists, same way we have got a few functions which can be used for working with the set also. Okay. Let's see. Defining set is pretty simple. Instead of the list keyword, you are going to use the set keyword, and then you will define set of what, and then you can basically define other things. If you want to add a value to the set, the function s.add or the set.add. If you want to just check if a value already exists in a set, you can quickly check it like this, system.assert. So system class is there, and in that there is a function called assert. This will help you check, with using this s.contains, you can basically check if the value already exists in the set. If you want to remove a particular value from the set, there is this set.remove function. If you want to store, this is a set of strings. If you want to basically store a list of countries, you can basically put it like this, okay. So this is how you work with list and set. So one is ordered collection, one is unordered collection. List allows you to store the same value multiple times. Set doesn't allow that, okay. Now depending on your business requirement, you can choose what works best for your particular requirement, all right. Okay, so that's about set. Now we'll go to the next one, which is map. Yeah. Now map is the data type which is primarily used for storing key value pair. Now what is a key value pair? Before we get into this, let's understand key value pair a little. So key value pair is when you are basically trying to store, when you want a variable which can be used for storing a key and a value and a collection of that. For example, if I just want countries and currency, okay, so I want to say, okay, India, INR, US, USD, okay, Australia, Australian dollar, Canada, Canadian dollars, okay, UAE, dirhams. So now if I want to store this information, this kind of an information that I have got, these are the left side values are key and these are values, okay. Now you may ask, why would we need this? We would need this because if we have to execute the business logic, let's say I want to execute a business logic where I want my algorithm to run based on the currency. So I have 20% discount for, if someone is buying in Indian currency, I have got 10% discount if the person is buying in US currency. Don't go by why it will be there and all. That's not for us to think on, but let's say that is the kind of requirement. Now what you can do is you can basically, based on a value, let's say this is the customer's for the customer you have got a field called country, and based on the current country you want to basically retrieve the currency, and using the currency you want to do some calculation, etc. Then you will need this kind of a key value pairing. Okay, this is just one example, but there can be more such examples, right? So that is what you can basically use your this is what you can use your map for. Okay, so defining map is pretty simple. Now in map there are two things. It's not just collection of one value, one set of values. It is a collection of two set of values. One is the key and one is the values, right? Like we were discussing countries and currencies. So there are countries and then there are currencies. So when you're defining map, you will have to define the map like this. So you will have to define two. First one is for the key and the second one is for the value. So this is key and this is value. You've got it? So key always has to be unique, by the way. There's something we have to keep in mind. Key has to be unique, value can be repeated. So multiple keys can have the same value, but key has to be unique. So you cannot have multiple keys, because then your program will not be able to work properly. All right. So that is the thing. So like here what we have defined, country and currency both are going to be string. So I have defined a map of string and string, and yeah, you can define it like this. Now here if you see this particular example, currencies dot put, yeah, so now if you want to put or add a value, set of key and value, you can basically add it like this, use the map dot put, or if it is an integer and string, you can put it like this. All right. If you want to check if a certain key exists, you can use the same system.assert. So system.assert will basically let you check if a certain key exists or not for value. Okay. Yeah, and then same way there are functions. Let's say you want to retrieve the currency of a particular country by country, you can use this function .get. So you can do map.get, and in the parameter you have to supply the key, and it will automatically retrieve the value, and using that value, if you want to basically now go ahead and execute your logic, you can do that. And yeah, or another thing, if you just want to retrieve a complete set of all the countries, you can basically do this. So you can basically get the set of, because there is this set of keys and then set of values. If you just want to quickly retrieve the set of keys, you can basically retrieve it using this. Okay, the usual key set function, and you can store it as a different string. Okay, so these are the primary data types which are going to be used or which are used in Apex. So now we are familiar with the data types. We understand what are the different types of data type, which are the different types of data types which are being used in Apex. The next thing that we are going to talk in our next session is primarily going to be around how do we now use these variables. So we have learned how do we define variables, how do we use the data types. We have understood this. Now we will try and understand how do we use these data types to basically go ahead and write the Apex code. Okay, how do we structure our Apex code, how do we write it, how do we store it, etc. So that is something which we will be doing in our next session. Thank you.